thank you for joining our talk. So for those who don't know him yet, so Andras has been leading the development of MISP for the, 10, 12 years?
Something like that,
yeah. So if you love MISP, that's probably thanks to him. And if you hate it, well, that's thanks to him too. All right, so quick agenda. So we'll cover these three topics mainly. So why do we have this migration that is going on to MISP 3? The plan that we have, so where we are at, what we are planning to do in the future, and some consideration. So if you have any question or concerns that you might have about this migration, this is where we will try to tackle them.
Okay, so a little bit about the background for all of this. So first of all, for those of you that have been using MISP, we've basically been using the same framework and the same stack for a very, very long time. That means that by now, a lot of the stuff that we use have reached the end of life. So we started maintaining the framework version that we use ourselves, which means it's a lot of extra work for us. So we want to get rid of extra work, obviously. So that's one of the hurdles. The other is we also want to make sure that we can run with a newer version of PHP. So for those of you that have asked questions about when we will do that, this is basically the process that we're presenting here that will take us to something more modern. So basically, another issue that we had over the years was MISP has been growing organically since the early 2010s. That means initially we had an idea of where we wanted to go. That idea has been broadened greatly since then. We started tacking on features after feature based on the use cases that popped up. Now, obviously, the initial design ideas that we had didn't always match where we were going over the long term. This means that we ended up having to jump through hoops to make things work. And being able to start with a clean slate in some of these things allows us to basically, in advance already, work towards those goals that we nowadays have. The other thing was that we ended up with something that also overwhelmed users with functionalities. We had yesterday a really nice workshop where we basically worked with 40 of you on encoding data in MISP and so on. And one of the things that becomes obvious every time we do that is that users can easily get lost in functionalities of what they actually really need. So one of the things we wanted to do is also to rework that so that we have something more sane for different types of users and different approaches to it. We also had some shortcomings that we wanted to overhaul for a long, long time. But those would touch the database model. And the problem with touching the database is those quick updates that you normally do when you update your MISP suddenly become really slow and painful if we do those. So we want to have one big breaking point where you will have a long script that will do all the updates for you. And whatever we found suboptimal over the years should be restructured. So things, for example, that we want to do, we want to basically raise the certain parts of the data model to first-class citizens. That means we wanted to have, for example, the value field as something that lives on its own and has its own data model backend rather than being part of something else. We wanted to unify all the logs. For those administrators out there dealing with MISP, I'm sorry you have to go through that many different types of logs. I know it's a pain. It's a pain for us too. So I want to rework that. Same thing with indexing. Reindexing large data sets is surprisingly painful, so we don't do it very often. Even though we know where we could improve it, it is something that we don't want to do every other day because that would be a pain to do the updates. We also have more and more use cases, for example, with Dockerized installs, load balance installs. And for those, the initial design really doesn't lend itself too well. So we want to refactor that as well to be able to more easily split up your MISP across multiple things. So for those of you that are using MISP, one of the stupidest things we have that always comes up, and people ask us, why can't I tag objects, for example? So I'm sure that those of you that are MISP users, this is indeed a frustrating point that we also want to resolve. So basically, we have a plan on how we want to proceed, and this plan has been in place for some time, and we've been working at it. One of them is to update the framework that we use, the latest version, so that's CakePHP in this case. And we want to rework a lot of the old baggage. That means rework the deficiencies we have in the database model, replace a lot of the front-end libraries that are dated and ugly, and we want to also rework how we do background processing in the tool. Now, one of the first things we'll have to do, and this is something that we've been silently collecting data on our communities, is some of the features that we've designated as deprecated for a long, long time. We wanted to measure if users are actually still using them. So currently we have a few targets of what we want to prune. This is basically dead weight according to our statistics. But again, this is an opportunity for you all to speak up and to let us know afterwards that this is something that you still use. In that case, we'll reconsider it. So here are some ideas of some of the features that are basically not used by almost anyone and that we could purge during the process.
So now we'll cover the different steps that we have to take in order to perform that migration. And one very important one that we had to start even before considering actually migrating the code base to the new framework, to the new updated version of the framework, was to prepare the ground. So we refactor the code base to really improve the portability of the code using what we call factories. So basically, we have these factories that can output code, and with that, we managed to have some kind of framework-agnostic application. So if we ever need to update to a new version, which will obviously come up at one point once PHP release a new version, then it will be much easier for us to do. But if worst case happened, like Cake PHP dies, it will make the migration to a new framework much easier. Also, by doing that, we have reusable code for both the front and the back end. And reusable code means less code. And if you're a developer, you know that having less code in your application is a good thing, right? And yeah, finally, doing this work to move things into factories, we also were able to extract some part of the application to libraries, standalone libraries that can be used in other contexts. So, as part of this project of preparing the ground, we also developed, that you might know, a new tool called Cerebrate, where it's basically like a contact management database. And we used the opportunity when we were developing the tool to actually start this implementation phase for the migration. So Cerebrate is basically built on top of the MISP stack. And what we did is we took some part of the libraries that were already existing in MISP that were already created, moved them to Cerebrate onto the new stack, so the new MISP stack, and started building Cerebrate on top of it. So that really sped up how we could create the application, but also prepare the ground for MISP. One of the things that we also did in Cerebrate was to create a new UI that now is really the foundation of what we'll have is MISP. But in addition to that, and this is the last but not least, we also had to create new features in Cerebrate to help, well, to satisfy the project requirements, such as tags everywhere, an inbox system, a refactor setting interface, and all of these, as they have been built on MISP stacks, then it's really straightforward to use them in the new version of MISP. So, in order to perform this migration, we had to start somewhere. And Andras created this really nice-looking graph that helped us identify the interdependencies that we have in the application between the different models and tables. Yeah. So based on that, now that we have this nice-looking graph, we can see the least connected part of the application, and obviously we started moving this part first.
Yeah. So talking about the porting project itself, we've been having a GitHub project up for quite some time where we've slowly moved towards moving the code base over to this new stack, what Sami has mentioned. So if you want to follow, we have a GitHub project called 3.x, and there you can track the progress of what we're moving and how far we are along are. And we wanted to do this whole thing in 3 waves. So what Sami has shown before with the graph, we identified basically, again, the least interconnected points, the medium interconnected points to the most interconnected ones. So kind of we're moving backwards of what you would expect. So for those of you that use MISP, events and attributes basically come last because those are the most interconnected data points in MISP. So we started with user management, settings, sharing groups, and so on. So the things that are kind of low-hanging fruits. So yeah, here it is also explained a bit more in detail, so we can hop over that. The other thing that we wanted to do, and this was a pain point for us for a long time, for those of you that were involved in the development of MISP in any way, we basically have a test suite that is testing the API on every commit that you do in MISP. Now, the thing with that is whenever you're doing purely API-driven testing, that means that you often miss things in the internals. So one of the things we wanted to do, we wanted to have this decoupled test suite that was part of PyMISP to be directly part of the tool itself, to have unit tests and endpoint tests. So right now what we're doing is we're basically switched to test-driven development for MISP 3. That means we have way more tests and way more stable code base for that. So that's so yeah, we have a very different approach of how we're moving forward with it. I'm writing tests for the entire code base after the fact basically takes almost as long as writing the change of the code base. So we might as well start at this point. So currently where we stand, we started the migration in January, so the actual code migration based on Cerebr's code base. Since then, about 27 of the tables and entities that basically make up the MISP data model have been moved, some partially, others completely, so it's, there is obviously a different coverage so far for them. But it's an ongoing effort that is constantly ramping up for us, besides that break in the summer, as you can see. But apart from that, we've been putting more and more effort into it. The other thing that we noticed was the more that we have already ported, the faster we go, because obviously we already got experience on how to do it. We already have a lot of code examples of the port that we already have in place, so we're really speeding up with how we're moving forward with this.
All right, so even though we've been working mainly on the back end, that means that most of the changes are invisible to the users because it's not the interface that have been worked on. Still, as we mentioned, we've been building up on top of Cerebrate UI with some few improvements. So we are still able today to show you some like sneak peek or small interface that we've designed. So this is still work in progress, obviously. And obviously, if you have also any feedback regarding that, please, that's also one of the main points of the presentation today. Please get back to us so that we can have a chat about it. So this is mainly what it would look like. This is test data. It's not, sorry if it's not really visible for you. But as you can see straight away, the navigation menu has been redesigned so that it's less confusing. It's more intuitive, because if you've been using MISP, sometimes it's confusing more elements are located in the navigation. So now it has been redesigned. It's more intuitive, at least in our opinion. And it takes also less space. So you have more space for the data, for the graphs, and for everything that is related to analyst day-to-day processes.
Maybe something to mention here as well is one of the big redesigns was also the menu system in a sense that we wanted to have a clear division over different aspects of the different features. So one of the things that currently, if you're using MISP, is most confusing is where the hell do I find the feature? I know it was there. Even I, developing it, have the same issue very often that I go global actions, what is in global actions, what's in event actions, and so on. Yeah. So we wanted to get rid of that, and Sami has been really great with figuring out how we can cluster the different features into something more logical, or how we would use the tool rather than the tool enforcing its own structure on us. So this is also the outcome of that.
Yeah. So we say that we moved a lot of things into factories, and that also includes the UI. So most of the application will more or less look the same, so that for you it will be way easier to find where things are located. This is an example of an index, so the list of organization. And usually what you will have for indexes, you will have some insight, like graphs showing some insight about the data that you have at the top. You will have filters that actually works well and that are easy to use for every tables, same for quick filters, but also will cater to everything that users need and want to see. So these tables, they will have a setting associated for each user, so that if you choose to see, okay, I want to have this column at the first place, I want this column I'm not interested in, it will be hidden by default. So you will have more control on what you can see and what is more important for you.
Maybe that is also interesting in creating profiles for different types of users. So you can have a different analyst view, for example, from a high-level view, where you hide the features and the data that is not relevant for the given user. So this is something that we've been sorely missing. The more data we tack on, the more features we tack on, it's becoming overwhelming. So we want to basically cull that down. You create presets for your users, and then they can use those.
So this is for just viewing a single entity. So right now we're viewing a single organization. So if you are a user of MISP, you probably recognize the layout. It's basically the same, but with makeup. So we've migrated also to a new front-end framework. So it comes along also with a new makeup. And yeah, so basically you will still have the same thing. So information related to the entity you are currently viewing, but also anything that is related data. So in this case, for organization, you would see all the users that belong to this organization. Yeah, this is the same for the user, from the user perspective. Something that we've changed is how you can perform specific action on pages. So on MISP, you always have on the left side a huge sidebar that takes like almost 300 pixels that allows you to do some action. Now it has been moved to this top bar that is located here, where you will have on the left side every action that you can perform that will somehow modify the data, for example, delete that user. And on the left side, you will have all the links.
Right. Right side.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, right side, yes. All the links. So, for example, to edit a user, access the setting of that user, and so on. And something else that we also did, and that was really frustrating, is thanks to this move to the new front-end version of the framework, we were able to also integrate new UI component in the interface to really improve the user experience. One really simple example would be for all drop-down to have searchable text so that you can quickly search for your data instead of scrolling to find what you are actually interested in.
Adding organizations to a sharing group when you have 2,000 organizations on your instance was a pain. So.
Yeah, and to cover one of the most requested features, or at least according to Andras, is to have a dark theme in MISP. So the move to Bootstrap 5 made it quite easy for us to have themes. So you can have a sneak peek on what we currently have. It's basically just you load up a new theme and that's it. So we'll have 2 or 3 dark theme and many light theme because we also have some light theme users in CIRCL.
So a little bit about the to-dos and what we still need to do and what we're going to be working with. One of the big things that we also want to change is whenever we deal with MISP, we're dealing with a very event-centric view, so a collection-centric view. One of the things we want to add in addition to that is also an indicator-centric perspective where we start our investigation, which we very often do, by having a single indicator as our starting point. We want to pull in all the insights we have in our system that we can deduce for that individual indicator, pull those in and display those to the user so the user can interact with that. Currently, this is something that we're missing. Right now, what we're doing is we're using the search interfaces to find those values, pivot through events, and so on. And that loses us time, basically, in our investigation. So we want to rework that idea. Again, this is not something that will replace what we have. This will be in addition to that. So you can choose which way you want to perform your investigation and where you want to start out. We also want to make the attributes kind of first-class citizens in the sense that we really want to have more focus on all the data that is tied to the individual indicator or observable rather than just the collection. We also want to basically refine the way we search for things. This is something that we've also discussed during the workshop yesterday. We have a very powerful API, so we ourselves, what we normally do is when we want to search our MISP for data, we use the REST client and the REST API to interact with the tool, and we want to move away from that so that you also have that in the UI. So we're going to be reworking all of our search functionalities to sit on top of the API and really to be able to interact with all the features of the API directly. We also want to streamline how we do it. Right now, the event search and the attribute search are completely different in the UI and very different interfaces, look and feel, how you interact with it. We want to move away from that and be able to just select the scope that you're searching on like we do with the API. Now, the other thing that we want to get rid of is basically a lot of these type of things that you see here on the picture. For those of you that are using MISP, this is our export page. It's, as you can see, it's something that started out small and we started tacking on more and more. And nowadays, we just say it's deprecated, please don't use this anymore, which is painful. So we want to rework this entire thing and to have all of these export mechanisms in a more accessible way. Also, one of the things that we want to do is we want to aim for 100% mapping of everything that we did before. So if you have tools using MISP, we don't want to change that. So we're working on basically a translation layer to the new endpoints for the old ones. Now, when I say we're working on it, you've actually been using those in MISP for a while now. So they have been in MISP 2 already. A lot of the code that we're talking about is already part of MISP 2, but it's an invisible change. So we've made these changes already on the current code base. So the other thing, that's really sorry. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. So as Andras mentioned, we want to redefine how we view the data as well. So how we deal and we interact with it, but also how we view it. And so obviously we've been refactoring the event view. And the main thing we had in mind is we want to really focus on what an analyst would need to see at first glance. So key elements has been made in evidence. If you've been to the workshop yesterday, you know that we are really fond of context. So this also has a huge place in the interface, and we want to expand even more on that. Also, massive performance gains. So if you ever try to open an event that contains, let's say, thousands or even millions of attributes, you know that can be really slow, so it's not really efficient, let's say. So we really plan to have this massive performance gains when we'll move to this new framework. And unified graph interface. Again, if you are familiar with MISP, you know that we have many graph interfaces. We have the correlation graph, we have the event graph, we have the galaxy graph. So the idea is to merge them together into a unified graph where analysts can really drill down in their data by staying in the same interface. Yeah, and yeah, we have a sneak peek that we can show what right now the current work in progress. Obviously, this might change, but this is what an event might look like in the future. All right.
So some considerations. I mean, one of the biggest ones is that since 2012, since 2016 officially, our format is basically a standard that is used by a lot of different tools out there. We don't want to touch this. So we don't want any breaking changes that would affect how you interact with the API. That is one of the biggest requirements that we have. And we absolutely will keep to that. So every tool that exists that is using MISP2 currently should be supported. When we say near 100 compatibility here with the API, the reason why we say near is, again, some of the features are going to get deprecated if they're never used anymore in the past half a decade or so. But in those cases, even we want to save as many of the functionalities for other tools, and we're going to write these wrapper libraries that map them to the newer equivalent functions so that you don't need to change your tools. Again, this is something that we already have in place, and we're using it in MISP2. API compatibility also means synchronization compatibility. So MISP2 will be able to talk to MISP3. So you don't need to immediately update when we roll MISP3 out. Obviously, that means that if we introduce completely new data structures in MISP3 that don't exist in 2, those will be lossy when you're sharing back to MISP2. We're planning on having a limited support after the release. So for 6 months, we want to keep supporting MISP2. That means MISP2 will still get updates in that time, especially in order to make the synchronization and the interactions between the two tools better. And we also will provide you with a lot of tooling to make the transition easier. So MISP3 will be sitting side by side with MISP2 during the installation, and MISP3 will drag over all the data from the old installation and enable everything for itself. So the idea is that you run one script and it should take care of everything for you. Now, please don't wait with installing MISP for this, because it is still far out until it is ready. But if you get started with MISP even now, the transition will be made as simple as possible for you. Again, the main installer, if you've ever tried to install MISP manually, we're reworking that completely, so it's not going to be as painful as this. We want to have something really simple. So because right now it's really a pain. So a little bit about the timeline. So here you can see what we've done currently. So we're currently at the second half of 2023. And we have basically a timeline of when we're moving the individual parts also in the future until we get to a release candidate or a beta version that we can release. So the key takeaways from this whole thing, we basically are aiming for a very UX-centric, analyst-centric user experience. No more getting lost in just a mountain of data rather than really dealing with the features that you need. We want to improve how you search and how you monitor data in MISP. So we want to make this a first-class citizen rather than something tacked on. Right now, if you're looking at events, you get tabular views of just masses of data. We want to have an alternative where you are coming from an insight perspective. Performance and resilience are high on our list, so that obviously is one of the main driving factors behind the change. So we expect huge changes there. And we basically want to remove some of those limitations we currently have with MISP 2. Again, yesterday we had this nice example of attributes being interconnected with other attributes not being possible, which is really stupid. So things like that will go away. So if you want to get involved, we basically have some hopes for the community here as well, and that's why we're doing talks like this. We basically want to know what we can cull, so we're going to put out polls on what things nobody are using to see how it goes. Once we launch a beta phase, we really want you to get involved and give us feedback. Also, if you want to get involved in development, please do. Everything is on GitHub. Get started with it. Join the project and let us know what you can do with the community.
Yeah. One last note. I want to thank all the colleagues that are already working on the migration, such as Luciano and Alex, but also all the contributors that have been worked on the migration, but also provided very, very, very valuable feedback. So thank you, everyone, for that. Please continue to do so. Thank you.
So thank you very much for your talk. I guess we're open for questions. We still have 5 minutes left. So are there any questions? Yes, I do see one.
Thank you. Thanks, guys, for the talk. That was absolutely fantastic, and it's really nice to see MISP getting the kind of makeover it deserves. One thing I wanted to ask, you mentioned that you were adding support to configure the interface for various user types. And I was wondering if there were any plans to include some analytics, even just for the administrators of their own instance, to figure out what types of users in their organization use which features most frequently, so that they can kind of tailor that for their users.
Yeah, that's a very good question. We already have something in place that is completely hidden for that, so we could expose it indeed to administrators. So what we do currently is MISP internally aggregates the usage of certain functionalities so that we can gauge what gets deprecated. Now we could open this up to every functionality and also display that to administrators. Currently it's accessible to administrators via a hidden URL. But there is no reason to hide that, and indeed that would be a really good driver for your community basically to decide what functionality should go into which role. So that's a good point. We'll definitely make sure to open that up. Thanks.
That's one of the features we use to determine if we had to, what feature we should cull basically from the code base. Yeah.
Good. Are there more questions? 3, 2, 1. Yes.
I liked what you mentioned about analyst view, and I think maybe I did not hear, but I heard yesterday from some of you that maybe there are going to be analyst notes or additional functionality for analysts to work on, because that's primary focus on identities for sharing information. However, I really would like to see more of something for analysts to use their tool for analysis, for the CIRCL parts which are not dissemination and collection. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, especially for the collaboration part, indeed, some of those features will already come to MISP 2 because we need them urgently, so we won't wait until the release of MISP 3. So the thing that we discussed yesterday with analyst notes and really analyst interactions, those will come before that. So we don't wait for MISP 3 for that. That will come in MISP 2 still this year. So yeah.
That and with the attribute-centric view, this will really comes into place. Like it will,
Yeah, that is
really
coming in
useful.
MISP 3, and that will really allow you to really focus more on the other aspects that are kind of hidden away in MISP now.
Thank you. One last question. We have like 1 minute left. If not, thank you very much again, Sami, Andras.
Thank you.